In this video, we're going to look at compositing and making things blend together so that it looks like they are part of the same image. Now that I have a few assets to work with, I have my title, I have the graphic of me cut out, so my silhouette. I'm just going to place that somewhere nicely. And then I have my background. So I have three assets. Now it's time to blend these together so that they look like kind of one image. To do that, I'm going to use a couple tricks. So first, let's look at my cutout silhouette. Obviously, right now, it just looks like I was placed on the image. I'm not really blended in. I don't stand out enough. I'm going to show you guys a couple little tricks here. So with my layers panel open, I have my layer selected, which I named me. I can just double click on it and rename it whatever. If I double click on not the word, like to the right a bit, like around this area, if I double click on it, or if I right click and I hit blending options, it's going to bring up my layer styles panel from the blending options, which means I can like blend my graphic in with my background is kind of what this means. So there's a whole bunch of different options here that we'll learn throughout the course. The one I'm probably going to select is going to be bevel. Bevel is making it kind of like look like it has a rounded shape. So if I hit bevel and I play with some of these settings, you can kind of see what it does. It's just adding an effect to my graphic. So I want to like make myself stand out a little bit so that I look like, this was how it was before. Now if I add the bevel, it kind of just adds a shadow, kind of makes me pop from the background a bit. So I'm going I like that. Inner shadow sometimes accomplishes similar things. Maybe that's a little too much. I can do like complete color overlays. I can put gradients on graphics. So I can put multiple, I can even put a stroke. I could put multiple blending options on one graphic. But in this case, I'm kind of happy with that. I'm just going to add an inner shadow at the top. I'm just going to shrink that down a little bit. So once I'm happy with that, I'm going to hit OK. You're going to see now I have like an effects on my layer. And if I want, I can like toggle it on and off here as well, which is just kind of nice to be able to preview things sometimes for how they composite onto each other. By composite means you're like building a composition. You're putting a bunch of layers together to look like one. Now I'm going to look at putting a drop shadow onto my silhouette so I blend in even more with the background. This is how I would go about accomplishing this. I'm going to select this layer, drag it over the new layer icon, and it's going to create a duplicate layer. So now I just have two layers, and it creates a duplicate right above it. Now with this layer, I'm going to transform it so it looks like a shadow, just like if the sun was beaming down, I would have a shadow in perspective behind me. So I'm going to go edit. First, I'm going to actually double click on the layer and I'm going to change my blending mode and I'm going to put a gray. I'm going to color fill myself so that I'm gray, so that I look more like a shadow. And I'm going to hit OK. Now I'm just going to click that and I'm going to drag it behind. Now I'm going to bring down the opacity just a bit. So right here under opacity in the layers panel, I can bring down the opacity of my shadow just a little bit. Whatever layer selected, I can do that. Now I'm going to go edit free transform or quick key control T, and it's going to bring out a box that we're familiar with. This box allows me to transform this freely. So I can transform the scale. If I right click, I can do a whole bunch of things, like I could rotate. I could skew. Skew just does that, kind of skews it like italic with a font. I just have to hover by one of my edges and I can skew my graphics. So sometimes you might want to do that. I can distort, which is really cool. Distort's probably the most powerful one. It just lets me like target one corner and just like pull it, kind of distort it. I could do perspective. Perspective is really 3D, so just like this angle is locked, so I can create like a perspective that way, or if I go up here, I can create a perspective. So that kind of helps in this case. And I can warp. Warp is pretty powerful. It creates what is called a 9-sliced grid. And I can just, it's kind of like distort, but with like 9. So I can really warp things out really creatively if I want. So I'm just going to edit, undo that. So I don't want to apply the transformation. So I'll go don't apply. And I'll just restart. I'm just going to go Control T. And I'm going to pick distort. And I'm just going to distort this graphic a little bit. Move it into place. There's often a couple different ways of using the transform tool properly. So I'm going to do that. Maybe just zoom out a bit to see where I'm at. So it's still a little bit too long. I'm just going to bring the scale down. I'm going to distort it. Or I'm going to skew it a little bit. So I'm happy with something like that. I'm going to apply the transformation. So now that layer has this graphic. Okay, so a couple more tricks. So shadows are usually a little bit blurry. This is too crisp. So I'm just going to go to Filter, Blur, and I'm going to pick the box blur, which is the best choice in this case. These blurs you'll get familiar with just with practice. The box blur is pretty much the most basic blur you can think about. So if I hit OK, it brings up my window panel, and I can select preview or not, and I can play with the options. So that blur might be a little bit too drastic. I'm going to bring it down a bit. That's not enough. Maybe something like that for a blur. So this is my layer without the filter. Now this is my layer with the effect. So I'm going to hit OK. And then we got kind of like a shadow. The shadow might still be a little bit too opaque. I'm going to bring it down. There's a rule in the industry that a shadow shouldn't be above 40%. Because it's just tacky. I'm going to bring that down a little bit more. I'm going to go to 35%. You don't want it to take up too much emphasis. You just want it to kind of show off a little bit. Say, this image, this person's actually part of this image. So I'm happy with that for now. There's my shadow.